On this edition of the Correspondents, violent protests continue on the streets of Caracas. Reaction to what the United States and other countries say is an illegitimate election to rewrite Venezuela's constitution. You're fired. The revolving door at the White House as the president cleans house and appoints a new chief of staff to restore order in the Oval Office. And election trouble in Kenya as protesters take to the streets to denounce the brutal killing of a senior election official just days before Kenyans head to the polls. And welcome to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Mil Arcega in Washington. Well, elections do have consequences. And in Venezuela, the election chief is refuting a report that voter turnout numbers were, quote, manipulated and inflated by at least 1 million votes. That following the controversial election last week of a new legislative assembly that aims to rewrite the nation's constitution. Venezuela's top election official dismissed the claim, which was made by a British technology firm that developed the election software used in the weekend vote. The opposition contends the vote was rigged to pack the assembly with supporters of President Nicolas Maduro. The U.S. imposed sanctions this week against Maduro for what it calls the illegitimate election of that constitutional assembly. Election-related violence over the weekend has killed at least 10 people, bringing the number of deaths after 4 months of anti-government protests to more than 120 people. And here to discuss the consequences and the aftermath of the Venezuela election, I'm joined from our UN studio in New York by VOA Spanish service broadcaster Celia Mendoza, and also on Skype from the Venezuelan capital, Caracas, by our man at the scene, VOA reporter Alvaro Alguera. I thank you both for joining us once again. I'm so glad you got your connection back, Alvaro. Let me start with you. So we're told 545 delegates of the new assembly will be officially seated on Friday as we go to air. Is the opposition going to allow that to happen, Alvaro?
Good morning, Mil, and to you and to all the audience of Voice of America. Actually, the opposition it's not going to let do this. They said this is a fraud. This is the big fraud, the most powerful fraud in the history of the democracy. Where I am right now, it's the Plaza Altamira. It's going to be full of people any minute to protest against this fraud, which is going to be ready in any minute by the government. That's illegal. The people doesn't want that assembly. After today, they're going to have the superpowers to do whatever they want to do. The crisis continue, Mil. The people continue dying in the whole country because of the situation. The inflation of the day today, it's more than any time in the history of Venezuela. The days that will come are going to be very difficult to everybody.
So, Alvaro, you're anticipating, I guess, a larger security presence there at the Plaza Altamira, correct?
Yes, sir. Where I am right now, last week, we were here and 8 members of the guard forces were exploded. They were injured by the protest, and many people were kept by the
right
forces.
And I hope you stay careful. Celia, let me get you in this conversation. You've heard the allegations of voting irregularities and inflated counts. Can we believe those allegations? Are they coming from a reliable source?
I believe those will be allegations that are based on the data they received. This is a company that has been installed in Venezuela since 2004. It was created actually by 2 Venezuelans. In the past, they had never made any complaints against the results in the elections. That even when the opposition has put in question, for example, the election of Nicolas Maduro, that information was also monitored by international community. However, in this particular occasion, they have not had access, the international community or any many monitors had access to the voting locations. And that's why the company, after reviewing all the information, the data, believed that this election results were manipulated by the government of Venezuela. Now, we have to remember that those results had been only seen by the CNE, which is the Committee of the Elections. And that is also why the international community has a lot of questions about how they were handled.
So there's a lot of questions. You're at the UN right now. We know that the U.S. Has called this election illegitimate. What's the rest of the international community saying? Do they consider these results legitimate?
So far, we don't see any countries beyond Russia, North Korea, Iran considering these results legitimate. We actually saw Argentina, Peru, the United States, the European Union, even the Vatican has sent a message to the government of Maduro asking for this constitutional assembly to not be installed, to wait for the process of review. Remember that the district attorney has asked for an investigation specifically in those accusations of manipulation of votes.
So, Alvaro, President Maduro says about 8 million voters turned out for Sunday's vote. How accurate are those numbers, and what are you hearing from the opposition?
It's impossible, Mil. I went to all the places where the voters were supposed to be, and they weren't. No one went to that elections. A few people. No one wants that to change the constitution, including the people pro-government. This is a fraud in the government. There is a people pro-government that says that this is a fraud. They were in the place, the national. It's called the Consejo Nacional Electoral.
Right.
The institution that counts the votes. This is a big fraud, and the international community has to know what is going on in Venezuela because the media here doesn't inform what is going on.
So Celia, let me get back to you. From an international perspective, does it really matter whether there were 8 million votes or 2.5 million? Does it really matter?
It does, especially because what they were trying to ask the government of Maduro is not that to elect a constitutional assembly. They were asking the government of Maduro to ask the people if they actually wanted the constitution to be changed. That is a decision that he made as an executive power. And for the international community, what it does is sends Venezuela in a very dangerous path, a path that could end up in a dictatorship. And that is something that no one in the region wants and no one in the world wants to see in a country like Venezuela. That is so key for the United States, for the rest of the region, and economic power, and in a country that has fell down into a deep crisis economically, socially, in terms of medicine, and that the humanitarian part is what really concerns to the rest of the world. Okay,
and Alvaro, we're running short on time, but what do you think is at stake for the country of Venezuela once these results become official and this legislative body is actually instituted there as by law? What's at stake?
Mil, the situation is so difficult. The opposition it's not going to accept. They're gonna keep fighting for their rights. They don't going to accept this constitution. I believe this is gonna be worst in the future, next future, okay? That anything could happen here.
Right, and already
including a civil war. I hope not, but
let's hope it doesn't go there, Alvaro. And Celia, thank you so much for your coverage. Gracias to both of you. Please stay safe. We are anticipating a lot more reports coming from you this weekend, today and this weekend. So we're going to take a short break right now. But when we come back, it is out with the old and in with the new as the White House brings in a new gatekeeper to restore order after a chaotic couple of weeks at 1600 Pennsylvania. This is the Correspondents on Voice of America.
Health news and notes. This is Living Better.
Researchers like Dr. Tina Hahn and Charles Nelson say that stress during early childhood can harm children's brains and lead to major illnesses later in life.
dealing with and preventing toxic stress is the most important thing that we can do in medicine.
Kids exposed to domestic violence, kids exposed to bullying at school, kids exposed to neighborhood violence.
Recent studies suggest that stress during early childhood can alter brain structure, affecting emotions and behavior, and cause physical ailments.
So we know that high levels of toxic stress that occur early in life and then continue can lead to an increased risk of diabetes and heart disease as well.
Experts say the first 3 years of life are critical to brain development, and that safe spaces, quiet times, and breathing exercises for preschoolers can help children cope with stress so they can learn. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
VOA, telling America's story for more than 70 years.
The voice speaking from America and the war.
VOA exports America's most powerful product, freedom of speech.
Close the waters.
In parts of the world, information is scarce and oppression real. VOA, sharing a voice that says, we report the truth.
And welcome back to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Mil Arcega in Washington. President Donald Trump's White House is under new management this week. Well, sort of. Retired Marine Corps General John Kelly has taken over as White House Chief of Staff after serving as a Secretary for Homeland Security. Now, many expect Kelly will use his military background and his discipline to bring a sense of order to a White House that has been rocked by infighting and turmoil. VOA National Correspondent Jim Malone has our report.
We just swore in General Kelly.
After a chaotic few weeks, President Trump has turned to former General John Kelly to get his White House back on track.
We're going to work hard, and we're going to make America great again. It's all about making America great again. That's what we're going to do.
Kelly replaces Reince Priebus, who clashed with the president's communications chief, Anthony Scaramucci.
I love the president.
Scaramucci was fired Monday, Kelly's first day on the job, a signal that he's serious about ending months of White House infighting. Author Chris Whipple has written a book on the important role of the White House Chief of Staff.
You can't run the White House the way you run a family Manhattan real estate firm with a whole bunch of advisors coming and going and no chain of command and nobody empowered to carry out your agenda.
Whipple says Kelly's success will depend on the extent of his influence.
And for the latest now on the conflicts and intrigue at the White House, we are joined here in Washington by VOA White House Bureau Chief Steve Herman and by our VOA Senior National Correspondent Jim Malone, who filed that report for us. I thank you both for joining us. Steve, I'll start with you. It's been obviously a tumultuous couple of weeks there at the White House, but let's start right now with the latest on the Russia probe. Wall Street Journal is reporting that a grand jury has now been convened. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I don't think that was a big shock. We knew that with the special counsel, that with the investigation, that convening a grand jury would be almost certainly inevitable. I think which is just as significant, or perhaps more so, are reports that the investigation now is going beyond just the immediate scope of the election and the connections between Russia and the Trump campaign, but looking into the financial empire of the president and the Trump organization. That is what the president has said is a red line.
That financial red line, he called that. Has he responded to that? Because he did tell Bob Mueller that, you go there and there's going to be trouble.
I tried to ask him on Thursday night at the White House when he got off of Marine One, was walking back to the South Portico, and over the helicopter noise, shouted a question at him. Did Mueller cross the red line? I asked him twice. He looked, but he didn't respond. But I think we're going to get some sort of response to that very soon, because he seems to have difficulty restraining himself, whether it's on Twitter or talking to reporters, when there's really something on his mind like this that he wants to say.
Jim Malone, is this significant from a political standpoint?
I think it is. As Steve's indicating, legally, this is sort of what you would expect as a step. It allows the prosecution to more easily subpoena witnesses, to get documents and information. So it's a procedural thing that doesn't necessarily indicate that they're going to be indicting people anytime soon. But I think politically it raises the stakes in the sense that obviously it's another serious step in this investigation, even as the president, who was in West Virginia on Thursday night with his base, telling them that it's, again, a fabrication, that this is all a distraction, that the Democrats want you to focus on this because they have no agenda, and that they're trying to basically detour what the Trump administration is trying to do. But it raises
the specter, the possibility that the president's financial dealings with Russia or whatever country could come to light, which is something the president has been saying all along that he does not want to see happen. What's he hiding?
Oh, I don't know what he's hiding, and I think the point of the investigation will be to look into these factors, to dig into the background. We know there have been links with the Trump businesses in Russia for some time, going back a number of years.
Because his sons have been saying that for some time.
Yeah, and some of the folks involved in that were in that infamous meeting now last year with Donald Trump Jr., which, again, I think that remains a focal point here. Because remember, before that, the president and everyone else was saying, we have had no contact with Russia, no dealings. That came out. That has really changed, I think, the scope of the investigation and kind of where people are thinking going, including Republicans on Capitol Hill.
Let's shift gears a little bit right now, Steve, because the other news that was sort of consuming the airwaves was recent transcripts of a phone call between Donald Trump and the president of Mexico, where he talked about his signature project, the wall. What came out of that?
Well, first of all, I think it's just unprecedented that this leaked out, and there are definitely security concerns there. And it really, however, gives us and everybody else an insight into how the president speaks with foreign leaders, what he was trying to get out of it. And the case of the phone call with the Australian Prime Minister was very remarkable because of the back and forth about the refugees, and in the phone call with Mexico. Also, what it was clear is that the president, now remember, this was quite early on, but the president was very concerned about political perceptions domestically rather than sort of geostrategic outcomes. That was one of the big takeaways for me.
And this just all adds to this constant drip of negative information regarding the president's dealings with other groups, other folks. I mean, the Boy Scouts of America held this big rally. The president said, I got positive reviews and good endorsements from BSA executives, which turned out to be not true.
Well, it wasn't true in the form that they said it was, which was acknowledged at the White House. Yeah. The president had said he'd had phone calls from the head of the Boy Scouts and then with the Mexican president, and it turned out, as the spokeswoman corrected, no, these were actually direct conversations, not over the phone. So you get into, you know, how much of a distraction is this? Right. On this leaking, though, there is some suggestion in some quarters that this latest leak actually might be intended to benefit the president by showing him standing up, standing up to the president of Mexico on the wall issue, who's going to pay, and also in terms of bringing in the refugees under an agreement through the previous administration with Australia. So I don't think we've gotten to the bottom of that, but certainly one of Kelly's main goals here is to kind of stop the leak.
Steve, how's General John Kelly doing as the new chief of staff?
Well, what Kelly has said is that he's coming in there to be the boss over the staff, not to try to control the president. Although I think we're seeing in the initial days much more order in there, but it's been a very chaotic situation. He is a very strong personality himself, and ultimately his success or failure is going to be determined by just how much room the President of the United States gives him to really run the staff, and that family members who are advisors to the president aren't doing end runs around him.
So I've been told to wrap up, Jim, but I want to get the last word from you. 33%, his approval rating has now declined. Is that affecting his support in Congress?
It may be a little bit. We're finally starting to see some fraying, some breaks with Senate Republicans in particular.
Okay, well, thank you both for that brilliant analysis. I thank our Steve Herman and Jim Malone. We're going to take a quick break right now, but when we come back, election violence in Nairobi, just days before Kenyans head to the polls. A senior election official is tortured and killed. We have reaction coming up. But first, a reminder, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, and comments on our Facebook page. The address is VOA The Correspondents. We'll be right back.
This is BizBeat.
Rocks are hoisted and then smashed and pounded into dust in hopes of finding gold in a far north town of Ivory Coast next to Burkina Faso. George Gu Gambaji of the Bundiali region says illegal gold mining is on the rise. The lure of gold is tempting workers from other jobs, like laborers in the agriculture industry. And illegal mining not only pollutes tributaries, it opens the door to illegal migration. But big companies like Randgold Resources have permits to mine and discovered 260,000 ounces of gold for $121 million last year. Company director Bodil Ndaye says illegals take over the land the company has permits for and pool their concessions. For individuals, a gram of gold can fetch $21 in Ivory Coast. In Burkina Faso, you can get $51 a gram. Government crackdowns on illegal mining have not worked, discouraging international investors to the area. For VOA's BizBeat, I'm Philip Alexio.
And welcome back to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Milar Sega in Washington. Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta is urging calm as protests erupted in violence following the killing of a senior election official this week, just days ahead of the presidential vote scheduled for August 8th. Now, protesters marched to the Election Commission office demanding justice for Christopher Msando. Activists say his killing was no coincidence before such an important election. An official says Msando was abducted, then tortured before he was killed. His body was found Monday after he had been reported missing for several days. Kenya's Election Commission chairman says he's seeking extra security following Msando's death. He's also been very busy trying to assure those angered by the killing that this election will be lawful and credible. And joining us now to discuss the upcoming election and the potential threat of more violence, we're joined on Skype from Nairobi, Kenya, by VOA's Africa 54 host, Vincent Makori. Welcome, Vincent.
Thank you very much,
And
Neil.
right here in Washington by VOA Africa Division host and reporter Esther Githui-Ewart. I thank you both for joining us. Vincent, you're there, so I'm going to give you the first question. Now, given the recent killings of the killing of the election official, do you anticipate any difficulty in ensuring the assurance of a lawful and credible election?
Well, from the words of the IBC officials, that's the electoral body, there shouldn't be any complication. Of course, they do acknowledge that he was playing a pivotal role in ensuring that the system is foolproof from any interference, from any rigging. But they do insist that they still have a team that can take care of that, and they have no concerns about anybody being able to infiltrate the system and manipulate election results. But quietly, they do say it's quite a blow because he was the genius of that system. He was the real brain behind the system they had put together. And so we cannot deny that the officials themselves fairly uncomfortable about his death at that very critical time.
Yeah, but Vincent, I'm curious, what is the level of anxiety there in Nairobi where you are? Do you expect security will be tight as we head into the weekend?
First, we can only say the level of anxiety, it is palpable. I mean, it's really high. It has been heightened. And you can tell by the fact that thousands of people have been literally fleeing the urban areas. The city of Nairobi, you go to the main bus stops to the upcountry, to the countryside. People have been flocking there with all their belongings or whatever they can carry. And you ask them, they'll tell you that they're concerned that there could be a repeat of the 2007 violence, which saw over 1,000 people killed. And so if that is an indication, yes, there's a lot of tension, there's anxiety, and most people are saying they're only crossing their fingers and praying that there will be a peaceful, free, and credible election.
Okay, and Esther, let me get you into this conversation. First of all, welcome to the show. It's good to have you finally here on the program. But I want to talk to you about the recent the killing of Msando. He was not running for any type of office. Is there any reason why this man was killed?
We can only look at what the media is reporting right now and what the investigators are looking into. But there seems to be a couple of twists into this story.
Okay.
Because first of all, what we see now revealed and a trail of where he went when he left the IEBC office, at what time, 10:50 p.m. He was accompanied by a man, and then there was a woman. Apparently, the authorities have identified the woman as one of the suppliers for IEBC materials. And then later on, as the CCTV cameras capture his car, he is seen with one woman, and then you don't see the gentleman. And then also they say that his wife reported him missing on Sunday. So, you know, he disappeared on Friday. That he means he didn't go back home.
So there's a mystery
there's a mystery surrounding this. So I don't really think, well, as one of the key officials of IEBC, most people feel that there's a political twist to it. But there's also another angle to it, which the authorities are yet to unravel. They need to detail moments from the time he left his office to the time he was found dead.
Yes, sir. Are they getting close at all to naming any suspects?
What we've seen reported in the Kenyan media is that the authorities have questioned at least about 4 people. And what they have said has not been divulged to the public yet. So they're still trying to piece together what happened to Chris Musando and who really killed him and why this brutal murder.
And Vincent, I think the last time I talked to you when you were in Nairobi, there was an election going on, but in 2013. But polls right now suggest a very tight race between the top 2 contenders. I think it's current President Kenyatta and his challenger Raila Odinga. Am I saying that correctly? What can you tell us about that? Are these the top 2 contenders that we're looking at?
Again, same guys, contending for the seat. The polls are really tight. If we go by the polls that have been taken, the 2 different polling companies have turned up different readings. One favors Raila Odinga by about a point. The other one does favor Jubilee candidate Uhuru Kenyatta, the president, by something like a point. What it tells us is that even if you put them all together, the race is tight, is a neck-to-neck kind of fight at this time, and you can tell from the desperation in the candidates' campaign as they go crisscrossing this country. They all seem to be begging for every last vote from any undecided voter. They're saying, please give it to me, because each of them needs at least to win 50+1% in order to avoid a runoff. And as things stand right now, it could go either way, or there could be a possibility of a runoff.
Yes, sir. It's a reason why elections are so exciting, is because there's so much pressure there But I'm curious, from your point of view, as someone who serves the African continent, our audience in the African continent, what is at stake here? What are the issues that people are really fired up about?
Well, people are fired up about corruption. They need to get rid of corruption in Kenya, totally, because that has been a vice that is so deeply entrenched in the society, and also on the top level of the government officials and those who have served even in previous administrations. Secondly, Kenyans are divided along ethnic lines. I just returned from Nairobi. I was there for a month. And, well, I was born there. So we've seen those divisions. We have 43 ethnic communities. And as Vincent is talking about, the incumbent president and the opponent right now, those 2 communities are the ones who've been running the government. They're the ones who've been, what about the rest of the people? So Kenyans want cohesion. Kenyans want to become a nation that is together.
It requires a balance, doesn't it?
Definitely.
I mean, because of those conflicting groups. I'm really almost out of time there, but can I ask you very quickly, Vincent, has there been a Trump effect at all in this election, very quickly?
A Trump effect?
Yeah. No?
No, not exactly.
Not really? They don't care about what's going on here? We're worried about what's going on in Nairobi.
No.
I thank you, Vincent.
Thank you.
I wish we had more time. And of course, Esther, thank you for being on the program. That's all the time we have for this show. Please join us again next week for another edition of The Correspondents. In the meantime, stay up to date with what's going on in your part of the world. Just go to voanews.com and do check out all of our shows there. We're also on Facebook and YouTube. I'm Millar Sega. Thanks for watching. And for now, so long from Washington.